Welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning as appropriate. It is exactly 2 o'clock or well 2:05 in Manila right now. And if you're calling in from here as well or from Taiwan, I hope you had a good lunch or you're having afternoon coffee. I am Maisel and I'm part of the Verité Southeast Asia team, and I would like to welcome you all to our webinar where we hope to dive deep into the recruitment and hiring practices and working conditions of migrant fishers in Taiwan. This is the first time that we are sharing publicly our research report, and we look forward to sharing our findings with you and later on, hopefully facilitate a discussion about working together to sustain the momentum given that forced labor in fishing is a hot and pressing topic, not only in Southeast Asia region, but also
surprisingly strict.
I think this year there were about 3 reports released about the fishing industry in Taiwan. And last Wednesday, Greenpeace Southeast Asia also hosted a similar webinar on forced labor at sea. And of course, we are happy to be able to contribute to this space and build on the work that you all have already been doing. Before we dive in, I would like to invite our Executive Director of the Verite Southeast Asia, Marie Apostol, to formally welcome everybody. Marie?
Thank you, Maisel, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. I'm not going to take very long. I just want to thank you all for joining us. It's been a long journey to get this report out, and our teams have worked hard on it, and I'm sure and they've worked with other NGOs, and a lot of you have contributed to this. So thank you for joining us today. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Walmart Foundation for the generous support that that funded this study on recruitment and employment experiences of Filipino migrant fishers in Taiwan. Verite, in a lot of our work, we work with corporations and supply chains, but in our research studies and in our publications, what we really want to show and what we really want people to see is to put a face to we want businesses and other stakeholders to put a face to the issues and understand how they impact on people's lives. And we're hoping that studies like the one we're presenting today will help us look for solutions that actually humanize, that are humanized and impact directly on people's lives. We have some excellent, highly respected reactors today that I'm looking forward to hearing from. And we have quite a good turnout of nonprofits, foundations, and research organizations. So I believe that we'll have a really productive discussion today. I'll close with that. Thank you, and I'll hand it back to Maisel.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you so much for joining us. I know your schedule has been pretty crazy lately, so thank you. I hope to see you again later. So everyone, I'm sure this is not your first webinar experience, but as your moderator, I feel like I'm compelled to give you some reminders. First off, I'd like to encourage you to turn on your video cameras if you can, or if your internet or Wi-Fi is strong enough. I know if I am at home, I won't be able to do it, but again, if you can, it would be good to see not only your names, but also your faces. I would also like to, if you would also like to hear the presentations in Chinese, we've made available an interpreter. You can just change your channel at the bottom right, at the bottom part of the Zoom. And third is we encourage you to submit your questions or comments. And you can do so by sending a message through the chat box at any time before, during, or after a presentation, or you can take note of them first and we can take them up during the Q&A. Again, last but not least, as we've mentioned in our invitation, this webinar is being shown live, or as the kids call it these days, live streaming. We're currently live streaming on the Facebook page of My Labor Matters. So if you have a Facebook account, or even if you don't, I think you can still watch the whole thing. Gabriella will share in the chat box the link to that Facebook page. So please feel free to share it with your friends, colleagues, and family. Our agenda today is pretty simple. Next slide, please. We hope to present to you, of course, the research findings, as well as some of the activities we've done in the program, and that will be followed by short presentations by our reactors. We'll then open up the floor for question and discussion, and we'll wrap things up with a synthesis. Okay, without further ado, let's begin with our main presenter for today. She is the Senior Director at Verité Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. And she leads the Research and Stakeholder Engagement Department of VSEA. I think I'll let her introduce herself some more. You have the virtual floor, Daryl.
Thank you so much, Maisel. Hello, everyone. Good morning to those who are calling in. I understand it's, we have participants from all corners of the globe. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to attend this webinar. My name is Daryl Delgado. I'm the Senior Director for Research and Stakeholder Engagement at Verite Southeast Asia. I recognize so many names and so many faces here in the participant list, and how I wish we were in an actual assembly hall or in an actual meeting room so that we could all greet each other. Many of you here have, we've worked with, or we've been in meetings with. Some of you I was in a meeting with just 2 days ago, actually. So it's wonderful to see you all. My role in this webinar is to present to you primarily the research that we did on migrant fishers in Taiwan tuna fishing vessels. But I'd also like to talk about the larger project under which that research was conducted. Next slide, please. Okay, so in 2018, we were very fortunate to get funding from the Walmart Foundation to expand our work on responsible recruitment. So this work, we decided to focus on a few commodities, and one of them is tuna. So the theme of the project is promoting responsible recruitment and amplifying worker voice. Our approach has always been a multi-stakeholder approach. So in one of our objectives for this project was to identify barriers and challenges to responsible recruitment in both the formal and informal sectors of work. We also wanted to determine conditions that are necessary for responsible recruitment to be normalized or to take root. And then, of course, we wanted to capacitate key actors from various stakeholders and find a way to provide a path to scale. Next slide. So these are just some of the components of that program. Looking at it now, I realize that it was quite a big program. And it feels like, the time passed very fast. But like I said, research is just one of the components of that program. The other components were tools development. And these tools were aimed at identifying risks and red flags of labor trafficking, as well as exploitative and illegal labor recruiter and employer practices. We also designed and delivered several capacity building sessions for different stakeholders, and the objective of those capacity building activities is, of course, to provide a path to scale and to explore solutions and identify implementation strategies. And then we spent quite a large amount of time engaging the different stakeholders. We talked to workers themselves, their families. We talked to job seekers, recruitment agencies, informal recruitment agents. We tried to reach out to employers. We were able, towards the end of the program, to engage vessel owners. And of course, we talked to all of you, our friends in the civil society network, and the different government offices who were so kind as to entertain us, and were so patient with our many questions. Next slide. in the tools development and capacity building components, I will not go very deeply into this. We will publish a report of the sort of the proceedings of the program, but just for those who are interested, we developed tools and we delivered them, and these tools are available. Okay, so these tools were designed for the different stakeholders. We designed tools and trainings for the private sector, for the civil society organizations in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Taiwan, and of course for job seekers, workers, and different fishing communities in General Santos, and to a certain extent, Mati in Davao, Southern Philippines. Next slide. With the private sector, our engagement with them yielded 2 rounds of trainings and several sessions of consultation. We were also able to pilot with a few vessel owner companies some of our tools. We were able to get really good data, very good information from them that help illuminate the challenges even more. And yes, and we will continue to reach out to them and to work with industry actors to continue exploring and implementing these strategies. Next slide. Yeah, a lot of our time and efforts were spent just trying to, well, first of all, getting to know who are the many different stakeholders and specifically civil society organizations, NGOs, individuals who have been providing services and support to migrant fishers in Taiwan and also to the local fishers in Jensen. And if you are familiar with the landscape in Taiwan, you would know that Taiwan has a very vibrant NGO community, which we were happy to be welcomed into. So for this network, we organized roundtable discussions and sort of action planning, wherein we brought our NGO friends from the Philippines to Taiwan, and we had that wonderful session in August of last year. In the Philippines, for the Jensen focused project, we conducted a series of legal trainings and legal clinics through our partner Saligan. Saligan is an organization of lawyers, and they've been a longtime partner of Verite as well. Next slide. And for the fishers and workers themselves, apart from engaging them, of course, for our research reports, which are focused on their experiences, we made sure to give back a little something to them. And one of the key issues that we found for the in the context of workers in Jensen, and this is an issue that we have known for many years, and this is the issue of the lack of documentation, which renders them invisible, and also which affects their social mobility and affect their access to basic services and even access to formal employment. So we were lucky to find a local maritime school, and we're really thankful to the Marina office in Jensen who referred us to the Maritime Center, and this Maritime Center allowed us to expand their course to include rights-based training modules. And then we sponsored a number of previously untrained, even undocumented handline workers to go through the formal basic training and finally get the seaman's book. So we did that we did that in order to document the potential or the possibility of this. We know how much it costs, we know what it takes, and we think that this can be piloted, not just in Jensen, but in other LGUs as well. Next slide. And of course, for the worker voice component of this project, we revamped our worker communication channel, which is called My Labor Matters. My Labor Matters has been in existence for almost 5 years now, but for the last year or so, we curated the information really for migrant fishers and migrant fishers in Taiwan. So through My Labor Matters, we were able to interact in social media with the different NGOs, with the different workers. We continue to provide information that we think would be interesting or important to them. And of course, this platform will remain beyond the duration of this project, and I hope you will visit it and interact with us and with the workers who are there. Thanks. And finally, yeah, as part of our of the research component of this project, like we mentioned, we produced 2 reports, and these reports where you know the research that went into these 2 reports happened in parallel. One report was focused on the handline fishing sector in the Philippines, and the other one was focused on the migrant fishers in Taiwan. And of course, it covered both the distant water fishers and offshore vessel fishers. My presentation this afternoon will be focused on the Taiwan report. I'm sorry, I think there are a couple of participants trying to enter. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this research took 2 years. We started gathering information. Of course, we already had prior information about the issues faced by migrant fishers in Taiwan. Exactly 10 years ago, we published a report documenting trafficked Filipino men. And in that report, we identified the Taiwan fishing sector as one of the key destinations of trafficked workers, and this was 10 years ago. And then, so for this project, we wanted to focus on the recruitment experiences of Filipino workers ending up in Taiwan flagged fishing vessels. Initially, our narrow focus was really tuna workers, tuna vessel workers, but of course we found that workers could sometimes be moved from vessel to vessel, and that the vessels themselves would sometimes capture other products as well, not just tuna. But the key objective of this report was to understand what are the current recruitment practices and what are the gaps in the recruitment systems. We also wanted to make sure that our recommendations are informed by data and by facts and by our current understanding of the legal and regulatory frameworks, as well as the experiences of workers. Sorry, can you go back? I just wanted to mention that the reason why we focused on recruitment is that we are aware that many of the indicators of forced labor that have been documented are rooted in recruitment, and we believe that responsible recruitment is a key strategy in preventing the exploitation of workers, that hence the focus on recruitment. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so we went around key fishing ports in Taiwan with the help of our friends in MWCD, Migrant Workers Concerned Desk, with the help of Father Joy and of the Presbyterian Center for Fisheries in Kaohsiung, AOS in Kaohsiung, but also on our own independently. We sought out workers who had current experience in vessels, or who are currently processing their applications for work in vessels. All right. Yeah, and although it was we had limited opportunities, but we managed to inspect a few vessels, both offshore and distant water fishing vessels. And we spent a good amount of time doing a thorough review of related literature, all of the published reports that our NGO friends did, and of course the laws. Okay, so in total, as part of the research report, we talked to 101 respondents. Of course, there were so many other workers that we talked to, sometimes informally or casually, and because it was difficult to aggregate data from those casual, although important conversations. Ultimately, we only counted about 77 workers, and then of course the representatives from the POEA and from the Philippine Overseas Labor Office, specifically in Kaohsiung and also in Taipei. And we also managed to talk to a few recruitment agencies and several NGOs. Thanks. Next. Okay, I think everyone is aware that that Taiwan's fishing sector relies heavily on migrant workers, and Filipinos make up the second largest population of those migrants. Indonesians comprise a huge percentage of that population. I remember we were asked once in a forum, why did we focus on Filipino workers? Well, apart from the fact that it was the way our larger responsible recruitment program was designed, we were also interested in seeing how the recruitment of Filipino workers for fishing vessels has evolved over the years. The Philippines is always used as an example of good practice, of strong systems and protections for overseas workers, and it has always been held up as a model. So we wanted to see how well that model works in practice and what other areas for improvement there may be. Okay. Next. Okay, I don't think I need to go into a discussion of the regulations, but suffice it to say that as far as the recruitment of migrant fishers, Filipino migrant fishers is concerned, these are the key pieces of legislation. And it's also important to note that although all of the workers that we talked to got their jobs through recruiters and recruitment agencies, there is a special hiring program for Taiwan, which does not require the use of labor brokers. However, this was, this is very seldom used. And again, among the fishers that we interviewed, none of them went through the special hiring program. Okay. Another important thing to note is that under the Philippine regulations, and I'm talking about the 2016 rules, there is a very clear provision on fees, and it very clearly states that manning and processing fees cannot be charged to workers, and we point this out as a really strong part of the law. And apart from that, okay, the regulation does specify what these fees cover and to whom and when they may be charged. Okay, next. Okay, this is just, we also looked at, of course, the relevant regulations in Taiwan. And so this slide is just to show you what it means when NGOs and media reporters say that there is a split system in Taiwan's legal framework. So this is because although ultimately all of them end up working on a vessel, doing almost the same kind of work, although covering different fishing grounds. When they arrive, as far as Taiwan is concerned, if you are assigned to a distant water fishing vessel, the Council of Agriculture is a competent authority that has jurisdiction over you. However, if you're assigned to an offshore or coastal water fishing vessel, then you're considered as no different from any land-based worker. So this is all it means when people say that there is a double system. But if you look more closely, what are the implications of this sort of double split system? First of all, to a distant water fishing vessel worker, the Employment Service Act or the Labor Standards Act do not apply. So it is an act for distant water fisheries that applies to them. Of course, there are common provisions between the two, but it is only to the land-based, so-called land-based fisher or coastal water fishers, the Employment Service Act directly applies. The other major difference also is in pay. Distant water fishing vessels just quite recently are now paid a minimum wage of $450. For a long time, it used to be 400, and before that, there was no limit. The limit was set by the sending country and it was stipulated in a contract. So that's the other difference. The minimum wage for DWF workers is $450, and for land-based fishers, it's about $717 US if converted to US dollars. Other differences have to do with social security and labor insurance. And later on, we will show you that another key difference between the two is their experience in terms of legally allowed deductions and charges. Next slide. Okay, we just wanted to point out that the DWF regulations does contain several pieces or several items that are aligned with responsible recruitment. For instance, the DWF regulation clearly prohibits work under coercion, duress, or other illegal means. It prohibits the charging of service fees and any other fees that are not clearly declared. And it also prohibits making advanced deduction of wages as penalty for breaching the contract. For offshore fishers, meanwhile, the Ministry of Labor allows monthly service fees to be collected from workers, but not placement fees. Okay, so I think everybody knows that the monthly service fees on the first year is 1,800 Taiwan dollars, second year is 1,700, third year 1,500. Okay. Other conditions of the job that distinguish the two categories of fishers, apart from where they fish and how far they are out at sea and the vessel specifications, is as I said earlier, the charges on board and lodging. So aside from service fees, offshore workers may be charged board and lodging, but for DWF, this is not the case. Okay, next slide. So I think I already mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate that there are already very strong aspects of responsible recruitment in these existing rules and regulations, that prohibiting charging of placement fees, very well-defined fees and costs, the recruitment for clear documentation requirements, clear employment terms and contracts, prohibition of contract substitution and deception, the existence of grievance and complaints processes, and the effort to align with ILO Convention 188 or Work in Fishing Convention. Next slide. Okay, this is a very busy slide, and I will not subject you too long to this slide, but this is just meant to identify some of the key gaps and areas for improvement that we saw. This is not exhaustive, okay, so this is just some. So one of those, of course, is that although the Philippine regulations already prohibit the charging of placement and processing fees, a significant amount of, fees and charges are still carried by the workers. And we will show later how much in total a worker can be legally charged, or what is the total cost for of expenses and documentary requirements that a worker can carry, and which is, of course, not consistent with the responsible recruitment standard of zero fee. Okay, another area for improvement, we think, is the monitoring of recruitment practices. Although, there are very clear guidelines and requirements for recruitment agencies, and there are clear procedures for filing complaints, none of the workers that we talked to ever pursued a complaint in the Philippines. So some of them did in Taiwan, and the reason was always because it was they were not sure. First of all, they did not have the confidence that the complaint will be entertained. They did not have the documentation necessary to be able to successfully file these complaints, and many of them just were not sure how to do it. Another key area for improvement that we saw is in the area of administrative penalties, and we thought that some of those penalties were not prohibitive enough, especially if you compare, for example, 50,000 pesos as a penalty for an offense that has to do with not following the contract. Okay, 50,000 pesos compared to the amount of money that the migrant worker pays to get that contract, to get that job, which is like 6 times higher than 50,000 pesos. And from the Taiwan side, apart from the two the two system that we talked about earlier, the DWF regulations does not explicitly detail which specific costs can be or cannot be charged to workers. So it just says there that any charges has to be declared, or you cannot charge a worker anything that was not agreed upon. So it does not specifically say no fee to workers. And of course, okay, there are inconsistencies with the contract and the terms and conditions that workers sign in the Philippines, and the affidavit and the other agreements that they're made to sign in Taiwan, which are also considered legally allowable. And most of this has to do with charges for board and lodging. Okay, next slide. I think I'll stop here for a while just to ask if there are any questions, because the rest of the slides are going to be a little bit content heavy. So if you have any questions, please, Maisel, if you can monitor and tell me. Okay, otherwise I will continue. All right. Okay, so just to share with you the demographics of the workers that we talked to. All of them were male, and their ages ranged from 23 to their early 50s. They came from various parts of the Philippines. Not all of them had exposure to fishing or seafaring. Some of them came from, landlocked areas. But it was also interesting to note that about 1/4 or about 25% of them had college degrees or formal maritime education degrees, and these people told us that, of course, they were applying for jobs in commercial vessels, in logistics, and in transport, but while they were waiting, the opportunity to work on fishing vessels came up, and they took that opportunity. So it was interesting to see quite a range in terms of educational background and work experience among the workers. But even more interesting for us is that they all went through, as I said earlier, the same recruitment process. They all went through formal, regulated recruitment processes. And we did not encounter anyone who went through irregular channels, which is interesting because, like I mentioned earlier, in our 2010 research, our observation was that many of the workers ending up in fishing vessels were hired irregularly, if not illegally. But this time, all of the workers, in fact, went through formal, highly regulated channels and fully documented. However, despite going through formal, regulated channels, all of them had to pay fees, and 90% of the workers we interviewed in Taiwan paid a significant amount of fees, either directly to their manning agency in the Philippines or through deductions by Taiwan brokers or other intermediaries. It was also interesting to note that they covered costs of travel, documentation, training, medical screening, and other items that are clearly prohibited by the regulations. Okay. More than half of the workers we talked to reported experiencing additional salary deductions once they arrived in Taiwan, and these salary deductions were on top of the legally allowed service fee deductions of 1181715, or even on top of the legally allowed, although highly contested, board and lodging deductions. Only 10%, a very small sample of the workers we talked to, reported not paying any fees beyond what the regulation allows. But these workers also, some of these workers also reported covering the cost of travel, documentation, and medical screening. Okay. About 50% of the workers told us that they had to take out loans to cover recruitment-related expenses, and it took them an average of 6 months to pay back these loans. Now, in the report, we really take pains to discuss and to explain how the fees charging and the deductions manifest. Okay, so some workers reportedly took out loans in the Philippines while they were going through the recruitment process in order to cover expenses related to the recruitment in the Philippines. Okay. Others were encouraged to take out loans to pay for placement fees. Okay. And still, other workers told us that they don't remember signing loan documents or making a loan in the Philippines, but when they arrived in Taiwan, deductions from their salary were made, presumably to pay for recruitment-related fees and expenses. So those workers who experienced that, the latter, ultimately understood that, I guess we have to pay someone back for advances that the recruitment made on our expenses. So in total, our research found that Filipino migrant workers on average paid something like 2,250 US dollars in fees, and that's like 9 or 10 times higher than the legally allowed expenses, or the amount that workers can cover, which is about 237, less than $250, which to poor workers who have nothing already is a significant amount in itself. 250. Okay, next. Okay, so again, it was very interesting, and distressing for us to know that despite going through highly regulated formal recruitment processes, there were a lot of reports of, if not lack of information, outright deception or misinformation on the job. And considering that workers are made to sign multiple documents and agreements, and some of those documents not explained to workers, considering that they have to sign multiple agreements, none of them reported having a copy of any of those agreements or contracts. Okay, so well, a few of them did say, yeah, I remember being given a copy, but like, I don't know where it is now. But almost all of them, okay, did not get a copy of their contract. They also said that they reported signing additional agreements and addendums. Some of them could identify that one of those documents was an affidavit that they had to sign, but the other documents were simply unclear to workers what those were. There were some workers who reported that they signed an entirely different contract days before leaving the Philippines, and they said that these new contracts indicated a different amount for the wages and benefits, and different from the one that was verified and processed by the POEA. So only a very few workers, again, only the 10 workers that we interviewed here in the Philippines reported receiving a copy of their contract and actually attending orientation sessions wherein the terms of the contract were clearly explained. So in the report, what we did to that small sample reporting good practices was we turned them into a case study, because their reports were so different from the report of the 67 workers who were in Taiwan. So we're not discounting the report of those 10 workers, but we felt that we just had to separate them because it was good to compare, good practices being reported by these 10 workers as to compared to the practices being reported by the 67 workers. Okay, another common finding among the workers has to do with the payment systems. Okay, we mentioned earlier that the minimum wage for Filipino fishers on DWF is $450, and for offshore fishing vessel workers, it's something like 23,100 now, right? And because there was a recent increase. Okay, the problem is workers did not always know if they were receiving the wages that were due to them, and this was because of several reasons. One of which is that in the Philippines, or in their 23,800. Thank you, Lennon. Okay, so one of the reasons for the lack of clarity or uncertainty about how much they're paying is because a big portion of their wage is wired directly to the Philippines. And it is only when they are back in the Philippines, or when they go to their manning agencies, that they're able to do a full accounting of how much was exactly wired to them. And there was and for those workers that did not opt to send 80% of their wages, for example, as allotment, they said that there were several unexplained deductions on their salary. And again, they think that this is related to recruitment or service fees, but ultimately they were left with a very small amount of money. And the common amount reported by workers is something like $50. So we consider this as sort of a widespread industry practice of just making sure that workers have a very small amount of money with them. Okay, it's not here on the slide, but in our report we point out that why this is a problem, apart from the fact that they don't have visibility into how much they are exactly earning. It also has an impact on the level of dependence on the broker and also on their ability to, for example, source better food or more drinking water. Okay, and it also had an impact on their mobility, you know, because they had a very small amount of money. There was very little they could do on their own. Okay, next slide. Okay, other findings had to do with withholding of passports and travel documents. So this, for some reason, passport withholding was more prevalent among offshore workers. And you know, workers said that they could only get their documents back when it was time for them to return home. But we did talk to some DWF workers who were, of course, onshore at the time of the interview, who had their own passports with them, and it might be because, you know, they're in Taiwan at the time. But they said that their passports and other documents are also maintained by the captain, and presumably for inspections. But they also said that even when they are docked in fishing ports in other countries, there was no guarantee that they could retrieve their passports, or that, you know, that they could be free to move around. Okay, work processes and working hours. So all of the workers we talked to, even the ones that reported good management practices or good recruitment practices, all of them were surprised and did not understand the question, what is the limit to your working hours? Because their answer was, there is no limit. Okay, there is no set number of working hours for fishers, whether they were doing offshore or distant water fishing work. And they said that, of course, there were days, you know, when the weather is bad, for instance, or when the moon is up and we can't fish, that, you know, we're just in the vessel, and presumably they could rest. But because they also lived on the vessel, they were expected to do other tasks. So rest hours and rest days were never guaranteed. Okay. Sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier, the practice of forced savings. So this was prevalent among workers in the DWF vessels and in offshore vessels. And I think I mentioned this already. One of the reasons why they felt they could not leave the job is because they were worried that they will not receive the full amount that you know, had been taken from their salary on a monthly basis if they did not finish their contracts. There were a few workers that said that they had a good experience with the practice of forced savings, and they had, you know, volunteered that a bigger amount be withheld as savings. But most workers did not approve or did not find this to be a good practice of forced savings. Next. Okay, living conditions, of course. I mean, this photo of a worker whom we interviewed on his vessel. Okay, it's a very common, very typical picture, and for all of the offshore workers that we talked to, they lived where they worked, and this meant that, you know, they had to accept what accommodations were provided to them. They had to accept whatever food was provided to them, and even water. You know, there were reports of just water shortage of drinking water, and yeah. And in terms of just the living conditions, we tried going into the living quarters of the workers, and considering that, you know, I think I was much smaller than some of those workers, you know, I had a difficult time because the spaces are really very limited, very confined, and and of course there were other issues like no privacy, no personal space, very basic you know, toilet facilities and cooking facilities. So people in on DWF vessels reported having better accommodations. And indeed, when we looked at those accommodations, they were only just slightly better. But the issue of space, like the size and then personal space, was also present among DWF workers. So the experience of taking turns sleeping in in the accommodation spaces was very common. Okay. There were other issues of health and safety, several reports of injuries and accidents, but also of mental health issues. We all know that work and life on board fishing vessels are not only physically taxing, but mentally and emotionally taxing as well. Especially for distant water fishing vessels who are out at sea for an average of 6 months. I encountered some workers in Ecuador, of all places, who had been on vessels for almost 10 months. So 6 months is apparently just an average, right? So they're on the vessel for long periods of time. They're cut off from communication, or they have very limited access to communication. They're doing labor and time intensive work, living in cramped spaces with limited access to good nutritious food. So you can imagine the toll that this can have on workers. And in fact, we and other NGOs have been documenting a rising case of mental health issues, and some of those cases have resulted to quite violent and fatal incidents. Next slide. Okay, any questions at this point, or are we going to reserve the questions for later? Okay, so we'll reserve the questions for later. In our report, and I think it's a 70-page report. So at the end of the report, we say that really the combination of recruitment practices in the Philippines and the practices of labor brokers in Taiwan put workers in a situation where they are unable to say no to their working and living conditions, effectively putting them in situations of forced labor. Okay, and that is why our analysis, although it was focused on understanding whether responsible recruitment standards were in place in their, in the process and in their experiences, we were of course checking those findings against forced labor indicators. Okay, so then our recommendations are addressed to the different stakeholders, primarily the government, and of course the private sector, the industries, and civil societies. And our main recommendation is that interventions to address forced labor should focus on the cost of labor migration to migrant fishers and focus on risk prevention mechanisms. Okay, I remember a conversation I had with I think Father Joy, who said that, as much as we try our best to help the workers who come to us, it's sad that by the time they come to us, they had already gone through, an experience that could have been avoided if they had only gone through responsible recruitment processes. So we think that there is a need for a comprehensive agenda that really looks at workers' vulnerabilities at specific phases of the labor migration cycle, including the recruitment phase. And to come up with interventions that address the specific risks that are systemic to the corridor, to the Philippine-Taiwan corridor, for example, or to the fishing and to the fishing sector. And again, focus on innovative preventive interventions. Some of these recommendations we thought, or strategies we thought, are those that stress the importance of multi-stakeholder response. Okay, we recognize that this is a big problem, and it will require cooperation and aligned thinking and action from the different stakeholders. Um, we also think that preventive strategies that engage all actors involved in the labor migration process, including labor brokers and intermediaries, should be pursued. And of course, any preventive strategy should highlight the protection and rights of workers. Okay? Resources and efforts should be focused on those interventions that relieve workers from financial burden and improve their working conditions and promote their empowerment. We believe that workers should be directly involved in preventing and addressing risks and issues that apply to them directly. Next slide. More specifically, for the Philippine and Taiwan governments, we urge them to strengthen recruitment mechanisms, incorporate a fees verification step in the monitoring of recruitment agencies, for example, and require pre-departure orientations to cover specific information or instructions to workers on how to access grievance mechanisms, how to seek redress, for instance. And also consider increasing the penalties for brokers who violate regulations, not just brokers, but also principals who violate regulations, so that these become effective and in deterring unethical practice. We would also like to advocate for the implementation of the agreement on free board and lodging to workers. And I'm sure this will come up again in the discussion later on. And require safe and decent onshore accommodations, and I think this cannot be emphasized enough. The practice of not providing onshore accommodations just exacerbates the conditions of workers. They're 24/7 exposed to risk and exposed to abuse because they have nowhere else to go, literally. Okay, so for the Taiwan side, our recommendation is that all labor standards apply to all migrant fishers, regardless of whether they are offshore or DWF workers, and also to provide feasible labor migration alternatives to brokered recruitment and brokered migration. We know that the special hiring program exists, but perhaps there's a need to really look into why there is very low uptake and why none of the workers we talked to were aware of this, for instance. There is that issue of contract substitution, essentially, which has to do with workers being made to sign documents containing agreements that are not consistent with the contracts that they signed in the Philippines. And also we echo this recommendation to the Taiwan government to make sure that workers have onshore accommodations and more effective penalties and consequences to brokers. And finally, we strongly recommend that the Philippines and Taiwan move towards a zero fee to workers model and implement more effective, inclusive, and rights-based inspection regimes. Sorry, that was such a mouthful. Next slide. Our recommendations to the private sector, are quite straightforward. We think that all consumer brands and buyers, especially from Taiwan's key export markets, the US, the UK, Japan, EU, should seriously examine the prevailing recruitment and hiring practices and the working and living conditions of migrant fishing vessels employed on tuna fishing vessels. So there are specific steps and actions that we believe industry associations can take. And in fact, they are already taking those initiatives. They have started taking the initial steps. For instance, the Seafood Task Force, the World Tuna Purse Seine Organization, and other associations whose members source from Taiwan flag vessels maybe should take a step further and really engage governments and really advocate for employment and recruitment system reforms and press for strong legal protections for all migrant fishers, and also incorporate a zero fee to workers requirement, or an employer pays model. Okay? And likewise for individual consumer brands, seafood traders, manufacturing facilities, sourcing from these fishing vessels. Our recommendation is that you implement robust due diligence and supplier monitoring mechanisms. Again, incorporate a zero fee model or an employer's pay principle into your codes of conduct. Require strict adherence to human rights and responsible recruitment standards. Expand your monitoring processes, and then mechanisms, not just to look at the working conditions, but also the recruitment conditions and the recruitment processes in the sending countries. The others are, quite straightforward: transparency in contracting, and push for only one verified contract in the sending and receiving country, and push for safe onshore accommodations, ensure that workers have access to grievance mechanisms and remedies, and ensure that they are not barred from exercising their right to freedom of association. And also invest in suppliers and vessel owners and employers who are making an effort to evolve their recruitment systems. Support them, provide them capacity building, maybe, and provide them the right tools that they need to encourage good practice. Next slide. Okay, I guess this is just to reiterate, because of the global pandemic situation that we are now all in, demand for tuna food products will continue to rise. And therefore, there is a need not only for health and safety measures to be placed throughout the supply chain, but also effective grievance and communication systems to make sure that workers are able to access information that is vital for their safety, and to make sure that they are able to report practices that expose them to risks, not only health and safety risks, but also labor exploitation. Okay, we think that with technology and new ways of monitoring and verifying practices on the vessel, that there is a need to look at how we can leverage on those existing systems, for example, the catch documentation systems and cameras and so on. But we also recommend for further research for other NGOs and other academics who want to take this up, to analyze recruitment-related issues against the frameworks of anti-corruption and business conduct, to continue doing research that also inquire into the practices of fishing companies, labor brokers, manning agencies, government agencies that compromise not just the workers' safety and well-being, but also compromise the environment and taint the global seafood supply chains. Is that the end of my slide? And I suppose to end, I'm sorry to end on a sour note. This is just a reminder that recently the U.S. Department of Labor came out with a list, including Taiwan seafood in the list of goods produced with forced labor. So that is important, not to malign the seafood industry, but to stress to everybody the importance of looking at the labor conditions of fishers, but more importantly, to look at solutions and strategies. Thank you very much, and I apologize for taking some time in explaining those findings and recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you, Daryl, for that comprehensive presentation. I know there is still so much to share, but given the time, you've sufficiently covered the highlights and main points of the research report, which is going to be available on our website pretty soon. We'll be sure to share with everyone once it is uploaded online. Again, this research report involved a lot of people. Most of them are already here, and I would like to echo Daryl's thank you to those who helped us during the fieldwork, and also those who agreed to be consulted. Again, if you have any questions, just type them on the chat box. I would just like to read one comment for the benefit of those who are joining us through My Labor Matters Facebook page. Bonnie from UK, hi, good morning, Bonnie, said that very interesting point about wage transfers, not transparent, high fees, very much higher than the SDG goal of limiting transaction fees to 3%. Yes, thanks for pointing that out and linking it to the Sustainable Development Goals. Bobby, I'm gonna park the question because we think that this can also be supported and answered by our other panel of reactors, but I've taken note of your question, Bobby. So as mentioned by Marie and Daryl also a while ago, research and in-depth investigation of labor issues have always been at the forefront of Verite's work, as the information that we get from the ground informs our other services. So it's also important for us to get feedback and continuously engage with stakeholders, especially our fellow civil society organizations. And that is why we invited experts to be part of our panel of reactors. Next slide, please. And to share with us not only their feedback on our report, but also to shed light on other issues, challenges that our report was not able to cover due to limitations. We have invited 5 panel of reactors. I'm gonna start with introducing our first, Sunny from Greenpeace Southeast Asia, or Efraim Batong Bakal. He is the Regional Oceans Research Coordinator of Greenpeace Southeast Asia. Sunny believes that small steps with a united goal leads to ripple effects that can change the ocean. Prior to joining Greenpeace, he is a assistant professor at Lyceum of the Philippines University, and he holds a master's in environmental science, goals, from the University of the Philippines. Before I give the floor to Sunny, I would just like to remind everybody, all reactors, including myself, to speak a little bit slow so that our translator can capture accurately our presentations. Sunny, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much for that intro. This is an old picture, actually. This was years ago. Yeah, so first of all, I would like to congratulate Verite for that excellent report. It's actually very detailed. And then I have a few slides that's just to guide me on my reaction. I promise it to be 7 minutes. Next slide, please. Yeah, just to depict the case of the migrant fishers out at sea. This is a particular example of a long liner. Okay, a long liner could stay out at sea from 6 months to as high as more than a year. It has crew members ranging from around 20 to 25, most of which are dominated by Indonesians and Filipinos. And then the way it is forced labor prone because it is highly physical. They have kilometers long line, and each of the workers wake up early at night, and then they have several hooks, thousands, even to 4,000 hooks, and then they have to put baits in each of those ones, and then they have to reel it in, which makes this particular fishing gear a very physically draining activity, not to mention the report as described by Daryl, short of saying it's like a horror movie, right? Or horror story that no one would like to hear. Next slide, please. Just to emphasize the point where the laborers, the migrant workers are coming. In the latest statistics coming from the Fisheries Agency of Taiwan, as of July 20, there are a total of 34,109 migrant fishers on board Taiwanese vessels, both within exclusive economic zone and the distant water fishing fleets. 32,000 plus are Indonesians, followed by 7,000 plus Filipinos. These two countries combined make up 86% of the migrant fishers on board Taiwanese distant water fishing fleets. I'm sure that my Taiwanese colleagues and the other speakers would be explain this later. And then the Taiwan distant water fleets is a $2 billion industry, and it's one of the top 5 distant water fishing fleets on the high seas. Next slide, please. Now, just to explain the forced labor as defined by the International Labor Organization, there are 11 indicators as depicted here: abuse of vulnerability, deception, restriction of movement, isolation, physical violence, intimidation and threats, retention of documents, withholding of wages, death bondage, abusive working condition, excessive overtime. Mostly all were described by Daryl in her reports. And then there are two elements that has to be present to maintain that there is indeed forced labor. There should be means of penalty in this particular slide, those that are not highlighted in yellow, and the involuntariness, which those that are highlighted in yellow, numbers 2, 10, and 11. If those two elements are there in that place, then there is forced labor in that particular vessel. If not, let's say it's just abuse of vulnerability or isolation, it's known as forced labor risk. So Greenpeace was able to comment on this one because we asked ILO to comment on this particular definition of forced labor on board boats. The illustrations in there, because there's no actual footage of what's happening on board the boat, aside from the stories that Daryl had mentioned, are those above the slide. Next slide, please. Here is the top four forced labor indicators: deception, withholding of wages, excessive overtime, physical violence, as described by Daryl. I think in future, the dispute essentially, if there most of the researchers would be coming in, would have to document, or most likely would be finding the same things as Verite found out, as Greenpeace found out, as was EJ found out. Then the burden of proof that this is not happening would be from the burden of those who are actually doing these things. Next slide, please. Now, just to give you a broad overview of the current developments that's happening right now in the context of all of these reports coming out. Just recently, just last August, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection has found that one particular vessel known as the Dawang, that's a Taiwan flag of convenience boat. They would not be allowed to get their produce catch into the United States because they are allegedly involved in forced labor cases. So this is one using market forces in the US. The next slide, please. This one's another recent one. It just came out, I think, yesterday or October 1. The 2020 list of goods produced by child labor or forced labor. For the first time in history, forced labor on fish was attributed to one particular country, which is Taiwan. This is essentially forces that particular country to comply. It was this particular issue of concern from the point of view of a national level. Next slide, please. And from the point of view of where going forward, I would not like to preempt the conversation later, but these are the 5 main things of importance. Ratification of the Work and Fishing Convention, C-188. It's important for investigations to disclose the name of the fishing vessels so that we could alert people that are going on board the boat. Since Indonesia and Philippines are those affected by the laborers on board Taiwanese boats, they should lead ASEAN nations in order to have one particular crafting rules on that particular line to eliminate forced labor. And then most importantly, these workers would not be going out at sea if workers have opportunities back at home. Okay, not only for fishers, but everyone else. And then lastly would be the use of market tools in the US and EU to deter and discipline fishing vessels associated with forced labor. I'll stop at that and look forward to the conversation later. Over.
Thank you, Sunny, for your presentation. That was a very good update about the DOL adding Taiwan caught fish to the list of goods produced by forced labor. It actually makes our work all the more important and timely, as this is an opportunity for us to leverage this development to push further our advocacy. Thank you, Sunny. Our next reactor is Father Joy Tajonera. And in 1998, he started with the Ugnayan Migrant Ministry in Taichung, Taiwan. Together with other migrant workers, he founded it. And right now, Ugnayan reaches out to all migrants and new immigrants in Taiwan. And they have an open shelter for all distressed workers. We're very excited to have you here, Father Joy. And it's nice to see you again. You have the floor. Father Joy, I think you're on mute.
Okay.
Okay, that's perfect. You're on mute again, Father Joy. You're still on mute. There you go.
Okay. Together with me in my table are some of the fishermen. You sit down, who are in the shelter right now with us here in the Ugnayan. There are 6 of them, 6 Filipinos and 6 from mainland China. So there are a total of 12 fishermen living with us in the last 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So my first problem for all these guys is that they're not working, and they need the work to support their family. What are the 3 main problems that we encounter in Taiwan? What you just presented, Ephraim and Daryl, the excellent report of Verite, was very good. You are right on target. But my main concern, our main concern right now, and Lennon is working with us, helping us a lot, the SPA and St. Christopher, Migrant in Taipei, and OWA in Taipei. So there are 4 groups helping the 6 Filipino fishermen living right now with us. The first that we are asking is why it takes so long for the government, I'm talking about the government of Taiwan, to allow them to transfer to a new job, while the investigation on human trafficking is still going on. The migrant came to Taiwan to earn some money for their family, and right now they're stranded. They cannot transfer to another job, although there are a lot of job openings, because the government of Taiwan, the Bureau of Labor and the Ministry of Labor are, the way I see it, they're dragging the case. And you cannot drag the case because all these people have family to support. So that's number one main concern that I have. The second is why, with all the sign that they are victim of human trafficking, the Ministry of Labor and the Bureau of Labor in Taiwan don't even see it that way. And even I have a problem with the Philippine Labor Office. Why they cannot see that the deduction of 8,000 a month from their small salary is not human trafficking. That alone, to me, is a case of human trafficking. Why would you take 8,000 from the salary of the fishermen every month for 6 months, for 8 months, for 12 months, for 14 months as a placement fee? To me, you don't need any other example. That alone is enough. Withholding the salary of the fishermen and going back to the broker or to the employer, I don't know where the money goes, but definitely it didn't go to them. It didn't go to the people who work so hard, 16, 18 hours a day. And the government of Taiwan don't see it very clearly that this is a human trafficking case. So that's my second problem.
Father Joy, I think you're again on mute.
Okay.
Okay.
Did you hear the second one?
Yes, the second one we did.
Okay. So the third is why these people came to Taiwan legally. They went through all the process of recruitment and with POA in the Philippines. Why they still ended up being victimized by the broker system of paying excessive placement fee and illegal work. If they are not in the sea, they work at land, they work at their employer's home or in their employer's farm, whatever it is. But why? Again, Darrell raised it very well. They don't have a clear copy of their contracts. And why still, after going through the legal process of the government, they still ended up victim of human trafficking. Those are the 3 concerns that I had. And I agree to the 2 other speakers already that raised the other problems that they encounter coming to Taiwan as fishermen. And the 3 of them are here with me. Here they are. The 3 are not here right now. I don't know where they are. So that's my concerns may issue about how fishermen are being victimized by this broker system. But it's not only the broker, it's the broker in tandem with the employer. The broker cannot do it without the employer knowing what's going on. Like the 6 fishermen that we have right now, they get their salary from the broker. They don't get their salary directly from the employer to the employee. The money goes through the hand of the broker. So by the time they receive their salary, every deduction has already been taken out. And there is no receipt, there is no pay slip, there is no passbook account or ATM account that they can trace where the money went. It's all cash on hand, and that's where the corruption and that's where the human trafficking really exists. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Father Joy. Thank you, Father Joy. I think what you and the other CSOs are doing to help the fishers right now, who are with you right now, is definitely a good example of how collaboration can happen between and among CSOs. So thank you. I think we can park your concern about the government, because we have a reactor right now and we'll ask him later on. But I think Daryl can respond. You want to respond to some of the other points raised by Father Joy?
Well, just in response to what Sunny said earlier and what Father Joy also brought up, if you look at the cases, they seem to be very clear-cut cases of trafficking or forced labor, and we know that the countries involved have signed specific conventions and have existing national legislation or instruments that should be able to address these issues. So I guess what I just want to say, I don't have the answer to those questions. What I just want to say is those are very important questions, and those are the right questions to ask. You know, despite effort by government and also by industries and NGOs to really clean up the recruitment and employment systems, and yet here we are. You know, we still have these issues. So, yeah.
Thanks, Daryl. I'd like to move on with our third reactor, Mr. Lennon Ying Da Wong. He is a labor advocate based in Taiwan. He started this concern on migrant workers from his fieldwork on Filipino migrant workers when he was still in the graduate school, and has been cooperating with migrant groups since then. Lennon, or Wong, has been working in the Chinese Federation of Labor, at the same time in the National Congress Legislative Yuan as the president of CFL, and the First Bank Union for 11 years. Since May 2014, he started to lead the Service Center and Shelter for Migrant Workers in Serve the People Association Taoyuan until now. And Wong and his colleagues in SPA have sheltered more than 1,000 of migrant workers and participated and led many advocacy works regarding migrant workers and immigrants in Taiwan in the past 6 years. Lennon, we're excited to hear your presentation and reaction. Floor is all yours.
Thanks. Okay, so should I? Okay, good. Okay, thanks. Yes. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Lennon. So as myself introduced, yeah, I'm heading the shelter VSEA of the People Association. A brief introduction of my connection with the migrants. I have been starting working or seeing the migrants when I was still in the graduate school. And right now in SPA, we help the migrants, all migrants from all sectors in Taiwan. We help them to file the cases. We offer the shelter to them, and we follow up their cases, their complaints, even after their sheltering. And we help them to find a new job through the legal recruitment process. Well, namely, actually, most of them, they still need a broker. That's a big problem. I totally admit. So it's my pleasure to have the chance to speak here in response to Verite's report. And I am very thankful to the efforts from Verite and all the other NGOs. And SPAN now, we are standing with other NGOs of human rights and migrant workers and also labor rights, we have several platforms and federation. Focusing on the migrant fishermen, we have an alliance for the protection of the human rights of migrant fishermen. So SPA is one of them. So next, please. Thanks. So this report, yeah, well, actually, Sony just mentioned earlier, yes, less than 2 days ago, U.S. government announced this. So Verite's report is just following the announcement of the new list of goods produced by child labor or forced labor. And next, please. So we can see that, next page, please. Yeah, we can see that Taiwan was listed here in the first time. One page before, sorry. In the first time, you can see that's the description of the why they listed Taiwan as the fishing in Taiwan as forced labor. Okay, because of so many problems that Daryl, Father Joy, and Sonny already mentioned. Yes, I totally agreed. Almost all the findings that Daryl just mentioned earlier in the report. Okay, next, please. I want to start with several questions Verite gave us before. Well, the first one is we have a little bit difference on the terminology. In Verite's report, usually you use offshore fishing versus distant water fishing, or DWF. Or sometimes when we use in English, for me, I sometimes use inshore or offshore. Inshore also is relevant to, or almost the same as, coastal fishing or near water fishing, while offshore, well, actually I mean distant water fishing, so it's a little bit confusing. So in my report, I will try to use local fishing versus distant water fishing, okay? Maybe there's no right or wrong, it's just a difference on the terminology. Okay, please, next, thanks. Yes. So the first question would be, do these issues identified in the research respond well with what we see on the ground with Indonesian, Vietnamese, and other workers and job seekers? Or yes, there are more problems than we might imagine, but I will put it later. Please, next. And the next would be, is there any difference between the Filipino fishermen and the fishermen from other nationalities, namely maybe mostly Indonesians and the Vietnamese? Well, I will say in the distant water fishing, it's basically the same. They don't really distinguish between your nationality. Take the salary, for example. The employers, they will give different salaries to the fishermen according to their year of service or seniority or their job ability on their work. So we see that the newcomers, sometimes, if it's a Taiwan vessel, legally, they have to give them the minimum, that's $450 US, as Daryl already mentioned, since about a few years ago. And if they are older, it could be more. But if it's FOC, this is one of the problems I will mention a little bit later. The flag of convenience. If it's a ship managed by Taiwanese with a foreign flag, there's no restriction at all. Well, legally, it's under the law of the flag state, but usually the flag states they have lesser ability to control, so there's none. Okay, so next, please. There is a difference on the board and lodging fees for the local fishing. Okay, next, please. I will put it, sorry, next slide, please. Thanks. So the board and lodging for the fishermen in local fishing, also from MECO, the Manila Economics and Cultural Office in Taiwan, or the de facto Philippine Embassy in Taiwan. According to the form number LBR03CF from MECO, the employment contract for the fishermen in Taiwan, it says on Article 5, the employer should provide food and accommodation. It says that they should give at least 3 meals per day and free suitable accommodation. So it says very clearly that accommodation should be free, but what about the foods? It doesn't mention so clearly. Okay, so next, please. Let us see the wording Next page. Yes, this is the word. Okay. So next, please. If we compare the contract with the Filipino factory workers, it's a little bit different. It's another form, number LBR03, blah, blah, blah. Well, where it says on Article 5.1, it says that, okay, the employer should give free foods and another free accommodation. Okay, please, next page. Next slide, yes. So this is the food and accommodation. So on these two small article under Article 5, it says the employer should give free meals and accommodation to the Filipino factory workers. This is the difference. But even so, the result is not too much different. Well, yes, one reason is the salary affidavit that we already mentioned. This is a very evil thing. And usually the brokers and employers, they will say, oh, you have another contract, but actually this is not a contract. The contract, we only recognize the standardized contract from the migrant sending countries, because in Taiwan, the Taiwan government doesn't really have a standardized contract for migrant workers. So all the contracts of the migrant workers are the contract from their sending countries. So in the Philippine cases, it's the country, yeah, it's the version from the Philippine government. So they have to use it. But from Taiwan, since about 10 years ago or so, Taiwan government have another document. I call it the salary affidavit. This is a document which the employer and brokers must list all the relevant expenses the migrant worker needs to pay when they are abroad, and also what they have to pay when they are in Taiwan, and also their salaries. And for the board and lodging column, there is a blank. So the brokers, they can fill in how much amount the migrant should pay for the board and lodging every month. So usually the brokers, they will just fill in, okay, 5,000, okay, 4,000, 4,500. And of course, both the employer and the workers, they have to sign, because if they don't sign, they cannot come to Taiwan. So it becomes a discrepancy. Luckily, the Taiwan government, they have an announcement from the MOL about 13 years ago. It was called Council of Labor Affairs. It says, if there is a discrepancy between the contract and salary affidavit on the question of food and accommodation, the Taiwan government should use the one which is in favor of the worker. So we always use this letter to claim the board and lodging for the workers. Well, but the contract for the fishermen is a little bit different. Okay, so this is another thing. And also, Daria also mentioned there is another common practice of addendum to the contract. It's like a breach of contract. Usually it's in the form of a paper listed a few articles, which said, briefly, it says those articles, okay, they will take some articles which is good for the workers, and they will say, well, these articles will be replaced by such and such. One is the board and lodging. They always list board and lodging. Okay, the workers have to pay. And second, the round trip ticket, okay, because usually the original contract will say that if the worker finish a 3-year contract, the round trip ticket will be paid by the employer. But on the addendum, it says, well, it will be paid by the worker. Another thing is a medical checkup, because in Taiwan, they have to have a checkup every now and then, and it will be paid by the workers also. Okay, so please, next page. Yes, so for the, okay, so there's another thing. What's the difference? Okay, I just mentioned the background. The difference is Indonesia government, since 2014, they announced that no one can deduct the board and lodging from Indonesian fishermen. I'm still talking about the local fishing, okay? But the Taiwan government, they say, oh no, you cannot say that, because in our country, employers can do that, okay? And almost about the same time, there was a successful strike by more than 2,000 Indonesian fishermen. They stopped working for a few days in Ilan. And then after that, even the official stance from Taiwan government didn't really change. The employers group and the brokers, they made a compromise. So since then, they stopped collecting the board and lodging fees from the Indonesian fishermen. Okay, please, next. And on the Philippine side, actually the Filipino fishermen, they are still deducted at least until last year. And I heard from the MECO officials that they already require no board and lodging from, I think, around October last year. So we already encountered some Filipino fishermen in local fishing that they are not deducted for such a fee. But I am not really sure if it's already mandatory enforced to all newer fishermen we can monitor. And one thing, what is the root reason for the board and lodging? Actually, the root reason for this is to take out the minimum wage from migrant workers. The employers group, they have been trying on this for so many years. And this trial was about 15 years ago. The Taiwan government didn't really agree, but they took another compromise. They said, okay, so part of the salary to the migrant workers are paid in the form of foods and accommodation. So the employer, they can deduct. That's the legal base for that. Okay, so that's the start point when they started for this deduction. Okay, next please. I have to run very, very fast. Next slide. Okay, so so I already said that. Okay, next please. Yes. So what improvements did we see, and what are the other? Okay, some improvements or some good practices in recent time. We have seen that in our alliance, we have been trying to communicate with the government, especially the Fisheries Agency under the Council of Agricultural Affairs for many months. And the new head of Fisheries Agency, Mr. Zhang, is a little bit more than open-minded than his predecessors. Anyway, so we had some talks for 2 times, and there will be another time. So the good thing is that, according to the Fisheries Agency, they have been trying to have an experiment. They set up a machine on a vessel. It will be conducted for 6 months or 1 year. And after that, they are trying to broaden the use of such a machine. The machine will use the bandwidth from the satellite. So they will let everyone on the ship to be able to share the Wi-Fi. So it means that everyone on the ship, even is in the middle of the sea, they can use Wi-Fi, they can communicate with their families. And of course, if it's really standardized like that, the fishermen, they can complain with this use of internet, okay? So this is good, but we don't know yet how the government will enforce that, how they will give some incentive, how the money will be there, okay? And the second thing is the FOC ship. Because of Taiwan, as Sonny just mentioned, this is our case, that one of the fishermen is in our shelter. Because of Taiwan and Jingchuan number 12, these are the cases our alliance have been worked on since June. Now the Fisheries Agency, if we have a case of a stranded migrant fisherman because of the COVID-19, and if they are, so the Fishery Agency now, they will demand the fishermen, they have to be paid full salary before they go home. And if the employer doesn't do that, the Fisheries Agency, they will refuse this FOC. Well, this is only for the FOC vessels. So these are the vessels with foreign flags. So the government, they will refuse them on docking. They cannot come to Taiwan anymore. But this is not, okay, this is something I admit, and it's really recommendable. But the problem is, from the NGO side, we cannot really monitor all the vessels. What about the other vessels? The problem always occurred when some of the fishermen, they don't want to work anymore. So when the ship come back to Taiwan, even the contract is not finished, the fishermen, they want to go home. This is how it happens. So when they go home, that's the time they will get a salary, and there will be a big amount deducted for the deposit or guarantee money. Okay, maybe 100 or several hundred of US dollars. That's a big money for them. And this problem is not solved yet. Okay, and then the next is life vest. Okay, the fisheries agency, they have experiment. They want to find a good model of life vest, and to require all the employers of the fishing vessels to let their fishermen wear. I'm not sure if you know it. Actually, on most of the fishing vessels in Taiwan, the fishermen, they don't wear any life vest. We know that according to any law in the world, if you're on the deck of any ship, you have to wear that, or you can. That's illegal. But because it's very big, it will prevent your motion when working. So almost all of the fishing vessels, they don't wear that. And we heard some cases when the fishermen, they requested to wear it, they will be cursed. What the blah 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 are you wearing? Why you need to wear that? Okay, that's how it is in Taiwan. And the fishery agency, they also, on the response of ratifying C-188, they said they are reviewing it. Actually, that's the work of Ministry of Labor. And the fisheries agency, on the response to the question, to the demand from us that there shouldn't be a double standard. There shouldn't be a double system. Okay, they said, okay, they will try to increase the salary of the distant water fishermen. Okay, and okay, so there are some good things, but there are more problems. The next one is the problems. I will mention briefly. Okay, the problems or the difficulties of the migrant fishermen includes very excessive long working hours, and the withholding of personal IDs and all the relevant legal papers, including their contract, their pay slip, everything that Darryl mentioned earlier, and also bad condition, living condition. Sometimes they don't have enough foods, sometimes they don't have a proper bed, and very often they don't even have enough water, drinking water. We heard cases that the fishermen, they were given only a box of maybe like 12 bottles of water, drinking water. That's for 1 month. That's totally not enough. We know that, but that's the case. So we often see the cases of kidney problems from the migrant fishermen. I believe that's from lack of drinking water. One of my other colleague, Jun Ling, he's the one who go outreach to the ports to see the fishermen. So we gather some information from them. And yeah, direct hiring, yes, as Darryl mentioned earlier, there is a namely direct hiring system, but special hiring. But those employers who apply for this kind of direct hiring are all factory employers. There is no direct hiring in fishing up to now. We have never heard of any. Okay, and the labor inspection, actually there's none. I want to be more to the ground than the report from Verite. There's no, actually essentially there's no labor inspection on fishing, even the local fishing. For the local fishing, it's the job of the labor office, okay, each labor office. But the labor officers, they seldom really go to the ships. Frankly, they don't go to the ships. They don't do labor inspection on the vessels. And for the distant waters vessels, it's the job of the fisheries agency. They don't do labor inspection either. They have their inspector abroad, 7, okay? They have several abroad, but they only watch the vessel. They see the catch. They sometimes use a questionnaire to the migrant fishermen. It's very, very, very minor. And in Taiwan, in some ports, they hire some interviewers. They will talk. There is only one Bahasa Indonesian speaker. Okay, maybe this person can speak to the fishermen, and they have the versions, the different, I mean, they have the questionnaire in different language versions. Okay, so this is done enough. They don't do it. And there are some, the grievances system, virtually there is no complaint system for distant water fishermen. The government, they always said, oh, 1955, that's a hotline, but that's for local workers. So now there's a system. If there's a distant water fisherman, they call this number, it will be referred to the local fisheries department in the government. But they don't really know how to handle the labor cases. Or some of them, they are trying to help. It works a little bit, but not really so effective as the labor departments. And coercion, one last point I want to echo Father Joy, because there are too many problems. If there's no time to mention so many, but one last point, it's very difficult to do any human trafficking cases in Taiwan. We know internationally there are so many indicators for human trafficking, some well-known indicators like confiscation of personal IDs, deduction of your salary, or debt bondage. Actually, everything happened on migrant fishermen, at least most of them, okay, almost all of them. But for the Taiwan government, the court and the legal enforcement officers, for them, they only recognize two things. One, is there a violence, a physical violence? Two, was this person jailed, or was he locked before in some place? If both things are not existing in his or her case, they don't do it at all. They don't even do the interview for human trafficking. That's why. So this is the reason why, just echoing Father Joy's question, why they are not taken as victims from human trafficking. They don't do it because they haven't been attacked, they haven't been beaten up, and they haven't been locked in a place. And in some cases, even the worker has been locked, they don't do it either. The case of Da Wang was complained by us for so many times to the immigration office, to the government, blah, blah, blah. So finally they made it. If we don't do it, if there is no intervention from any NGOs like us, I doubt if the government will really do it. So, okay, I think I will stop here. There are too many questions and I open for any questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lennon. That actually sparked a couple of questions. So we're excited to proceed to the Q&A later. But I would like to thank you for your very comprehensive presentation. It's obvious with the points that you raised, the depth of your work in Taiwan, and not just in shelter, but also in providing legal assistance to our migrant fishers and local fishers as well. Daryl, do you want to add something?
No, I was noting down a couple of questions, but I can ask them later. Thank you again, Lennon and everyone.
Okay, now I'd like to move on to our fourth reactor, Pearl Pei-Yu Chen of Greenpeace East Asia. Pearl, with a master's degree in international relations, has a focus on international law of sea and human rights. She brings with her her experience of government affairs and her knowledge in relevant international laws. Pearl currently is a campaigner for Greenpeace East Asia and advocates changes in Taiwan's fisheries laws to enhance human rights for migrant fishers and end IUU fishing. Pearl, thank you for joining us. The floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you for your time, especially Taiwanese colleagues. Now it's the Autumn Festival holiday, but it's so nice to be here with all you all to talk about how we can work together to protect the rights of migrant workers. I think the report from Verite is very deep depth, and it's very systematic, and it's very informative. I would like to add something on why migrant fishers, in addition to the reasons mentioned in the report, I would like to add on more information as to why migrant fishers are so vulnerable here in Taiwan. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first one is the tutor system that Verite has mentioned. It's very interesting because this tutor system, which would which essentially renders migrant fishers employed overseas, who operate dominantly in distant waters, essentially vulnerable to forced labor. And this tutor system is actually in contravention of the ILO Discrimination Convention C111, which Taiwan has adopted several years ago. And it's very interesting when we confronted this fact to the Fisheries Agency, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they were speechless. You know, they would not, they didn't realize that what they were doing has been violating the only international convention that Taiwan voluntarily commits itself into. And this might also lead to another major challenge that I think why it's difficult for Taiwanese government to raise the human rights for migrant fishers. And the second reason why migrant fishers are vulnerable is because of lack of strong management of many agencies here in Taiwan. When we spoke to the Taiwanese government on, withholding of wages, illegal deduction of salaries, and debt bondage, the government would come to us and say, oh, these are the misconducts of foreign money agencies. And because they are foreign money agencies and we do not have the jurisdiction to manage them, this is right and also not right. It's right that this falls under primarily the responsibility of Indonesian or Filipino governments. But it's also not right because as an employer state, as a beneficial owner state, there is still so much that Taiwanese government can do. For example, in the current evaluation of many agencies, there is no sufficient presence of NGO. As far as to understanding, there is only one NGO involved in the presence, but that does not include such as Allison, such as Lennon, and other experienced NGOs who have been very outspoken on the cases of migrant fishers who have been on the front line assisting migrant fishers. And the second is that the government does not inquire for distant water fishing recruitment. The government does not require many agencies in Taiwan to submit the list of foreign agencies that they are working with. It's mandatory for, this is mandatory for coastal water fishery, but it's not mandatory for distant water fishery. And you will see sometimes that the local many agency will be working with the foreign agents in Indonesian agencies that are already found violating several human rights. So they have a bad records of human rights. And so what I'm trying to say is that there are many other measures that our government can take to make sure that human rights violations do not happen because of some misconduct or the lack of action from their own side. And when I was speaking with Allison, and I think she talked about a measure, I think that would be really useful. She was saying that we can have the local, if a foreign money agency is found violating our regulation or is found violating human rights, then the local Taiwanese agency who is working with this foreign agency should be punished altogether. And I think that would exercise a huge influence to regulate our local many agencies to only work with legal and have a good record for many agencies. And also there's no strong punishment. So according to Distant Water Act, when a many agency operates in distant water recruitment, they have to deposit a certain amount of money as a guarantee bond for potential labor to solve future potential labor dispute. And it is still understanding that the government hasn't yet today confiscated any agencies of guarantee bonds. But there have been so many records, allegations of forced labor, human rights violation, misconduct, misbehavior from the agencies, but yet no guarantee bonds are ever yet confiscated. They're only an administrative guidance. Next slide, please. And also the insufficient inspection that Lennon just mentioned, so I will not repeat myself here. Another thing I would like to bring to your attention is the practice of lack of convenience. So now we see the future system. So we have a better labor recruitment for migrant fishers employee working in Taiwan's coastal waters. And then the worst labor standard, which is for the distant water, migrant fishers working in the distant water. But the even worse labor standard will be for migrant fishers working on Taiwan's FOCs, because they are not subject to either our Labor Standard Act nor to to the Overseas Employment Act. They are subject to the labor standards of the flag states, which probably are the island states such as Seychelles, such as Vanuatu, such as Panama, whose labor requirements, fishery requirements we are not familiar with, and these states we are not certain if they are willing to exercise their jurisdiction, to protect the migrant fishers working theoretically on their own fishing vessels. And there are also questions on how Taiwanese government can work with these flag states to establish any cooperation relationship that can make sure that, even though these vessels are registered to Vanuatu or other foreign countries, but yet are actually operated by Taiwanese national, that Taiwanese government can, do something to protect the workers working on their fishing vessels. For example, there's a tragic death of an observer working on Taiwanese flag, Taiwanese flag prisoner. And this prisoner was then birthed at Vanuatu. And then the autopsy report was conducted over there, and then, it was in Fiji. And the Taiwanese government reported difficulty of gathering information from the Fiji government because of the lack of diplomatic ties between the two countries. So Taiwan's special international status, the lack of diplomatic ties, actually make it extra difficult for Taiwan to request for investigation cooperation. And I think also make it extra challenging for Taiwan to establish such as another government-to-government direct hiring program with Indonesia, with Vietnam, or other countries where we source migrant fishers from. Next slide, please. But what we heard from the Taiwanese government so far, for advocacy problems, the good news is that the Fisheries Agency decided to list the forced labor as a condition to revoke the permit for our nationals for FOC. Because so far, if a Taiwanese wants to invest or operate a foreign flag vessel, the national will have to apply for permission from the government. And there are certain conditions under which the government will revoke the permit. And the nationals are found to operate a foreign flag vessel without permission from the government, there will be some huge fines and the vessels won't be able to use their own port. And within these conditions, forced labor is not listed in the condition. And now the government after the case of Taiwan, the government has promised that they would modify the regulation and make sure that forced labor is within the condition. And the other thing is that we had a meeting with the coalition had a meeting with the fisheries agencies a month ago, and they're probing the possibility of establishing a port state measurement, which means that Taiwan government will exercise its good control of its own port as a port state. And then the Director General also talk about having like convenience, having bad records of human rights or illegal fishing to not be able to use our own ports. I think this will be a good start, and that's something that the coalition and Greenpeace will keep watching to see how that can make a difference. How Taiwan can waver more influence as a port state, and also as a major fishing power in the world. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pearl, for your presentation. We wish we could have seen your face, but thank you for granting us your time. Thank you for pointing out about the lack of monitoring and evaluation of manning agencies in Taiwan. I think that's very, very important. Hold on. Yeah, I think in the Philippines, definitely we have a system that suspends licenses of manning agencies here, and definitely in Taiwan, it's good to have the same kind of system, considering that a lot of violations happen in Taiwan are because of the brokers. I can't wait to move on to our final reactor. Today, we're honored to have Honorable Rustico de la Fuente, or Labat Resti, from the Philippine Overseas Labor Office in Kaohsiung. Labor Attaché Resti has served Filipino migrant workers for 39 years. Wow, he was with the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, or OWA, and he was the first director to be assigned to overseas operations who pioneered the establishment of OFW, or Overseas Filipino Workers, centers in major destination countries. He conceptualized the selection, training, and deployment program for the first batches of welfare officers. He is, of course, a frontliner in various crisis situations and contingency operations at overseas job sites. Since 2006, he has served as labor attaché to Doha, Riyadh, Brussels, and Kuwait, and he's currently assigned as director of the Philippine Labor Center in Kaohsiung. Thank you, Sir Resti, for joining us in this webinar. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maisel, and congratulations to Verite for a very comprehensive study. And it has given us an eye-opener again, a re-opener, that there's so much yet to be done by the government. I have this presentation, and this is very short. On general observations, number one, the study has present literature on Taiwan-bound and Taiwan-based Filipino officers. When we started focusing on issues of officers, we found out that the materials available would be 8 years or some 10 years ago. And it would be very, very difficult to probe on the issues and concerns because the stakeholders would always tell us that those are history. We have done something already. But now with this study of Verite, we could have a very authoritative source of information, of new information, which we can use in discussing this with authorities, particularly here in Taiwan. It has validated improvements in policies so far achieved by governments of Taiwan and the Philippines. Clearly, those are in the national legislations. But it has also identified the gaps. This is the most important thing, the gaps in such policies and the oversight functions for enforcement of measures to protect fishers. We have always been banking on the presumption of regularity when it comes to the issuance of permits, when it comes to the inspections being made by port state authorities to these fishing vessels. But it is disheartening to observe from the findings of this study that much has to be done. There must be so significant improvements for these oversight functions. And it might be not only here in Taiwan, but also for the Philippines, because so many of these gaps are in the recruitment side. We have always been believing that the mining sector or the mining agencies are well managed, better managed than the land-based sector. And it may be true for the deployment of the regular seafarers, but for fishers, we see a lot of documents saying a different story. We really got to have a better monitoring back in the Philippines. I agree to the findings of the study and to the reactions of my fellow reactors that there got to be a further observation on how our mining agencies are recruiting fishers. The number 4, the study offers insightful references for development and complementation of policies and services and programs. Yes, we really got to complement a lot, both from the NGO community, from the government side, both of Taiwan and the Philippines, so that we could come up with better results for monitoring and change of the situation. There is no mention, number 5, there's no mention in differences in coping with life and work at sea between recruited real fishers, as we say, and the non-fishers. During our interviews with Filipino fishers, not only here in Kaohsiung, but also in Penghu, they would always give us the feedback that there is a big difference between certain groups of Filipino fishers. Those who came or those who come from families of fishers and those who have been fishers since they were young are having better chances of finding their jobs better. While those who have been hired, and here is where hiring also could be a challenge, that maybe in the recruitment business, they recruit people who do not have a solid background in fishing. They have not grown in fishing communities. They don't understand what fishing is all about. And here they are finding and signing contracts as fishermen. And so we always find two groups. Those who would say, I only became a fisher here in Taiwan, and it's so difficult in life for me. While those who have been fishers all the time from the shores of Batangas, La Union, Iloilo, Cebu, and even from metropolitan areas in Manila, provided they come from the families of fishers, they have a better chance of succeeding in their jobs as fishers in Taiwan. The challenges. Transformation of individual fishers into active participants in protecting their rights. Awareness building on rights would not suffice. Through the years, we have learned this, not only for fishers, but also for land-based workers. The challenge is on enabling fishers to manifest such awareness by asking the right questions at the recruitment time, expressing reservations whenever they are already confronted with what our fellow reactors say, that they are being offered addendum contracts and new affidavits. I hope that time would come that fishers could express reservations and simply say no. And taking courage to report recruitment and onboard practices, malpractices. We are living in a world where legal documents are very important so that we could prosecute the evildoers. Unless we can document fully, then it would be very difficult for government institutions to penalize those who are doing wrong for the fishers. And there is a need for harmonization of the Philippines and Taiwan regulations in favor of fishers. Taiwan categorizes fishers generally as fishery employees, though they give permit for fishermen. And the Philippine government categorizes them as seafarers. Here lies the disconnect. This creates disconnect in recruitment policies, in preparatory trainings, and expectations of fishers. Once expectations are not leveled off, then it would lead to so many adjustment problems and conflicts with employers. Current government initiatives, what are we doing right now? From our side, I have not written in this presentation, we do not accept documents for non-Taiwan flag fishing vessels. We only, for the distant water fishers, we only process in Kaohsiung those belonging to or pertaining to Taiwan flag fishing vessels. We also document cases involving distant water fishers, particularly in incidents where we believe that better management of the vessels by vessel officials or vessel officers could have evaded the problems. Just like firefighting, there's a series of fishing vessels which caught fire in 1999, and there were also so much crimes they were reported happening on the vessels, and this could have been prevented by better vessel management. MOU on recruitment and employment of Filipino officers in Taiwan. We again are in serious talks about having a separate MOU on recruitment and employment of Filipino officers. Before, the attempt was to include fishermen in the coverage of the special hiring program for Taiwan. But this time we believe that because of so many issues and concerns about fishermen, we better have a dedicated memorandum of understanding with the government of Taiwan. This would open for a series of consultations, which we see would be very, very critical to the findings in this study of Verite. And we could make the study as one of the references in engaging our counterparts in Taiwan government of preparatory to the signing of the memorandum of understanding. Even those issues pertaining to salaries, working conditions, the problems when it comes to deductions which are being made unlawfully or legitimately, we still do not know. But this having a new MOU or the first MOU could give us all the opportunities for consultations with authorities. Then we are in a joint effort with the Taiwan authorities when it comes to standard employment contract for Filipino officers in Taiwan. We know that Taiwanese government prescribed this template contract. And in the Philippines also, we have a contract, but not for officers, but for seafarers. What we are using for fishermen is very, very similar to those of the factory workers, as pointed out by Mr. Lennon. Those are for the coastal water fishers or for the territorial water fishers. But for fishers in the high seas, the template contract prescribed by the Taiwanese authorities is the one in use. Then for my final remarks for this reaction, Polo Kaohsiung supports Verite's recognition of a very, very crucial point, that effort should engage and empower workers to become directly involved in preventing and addressing risks and issues that may arise in the recruitment process and in the workplace. We hope that there would be a lot of capacity building, and there would be persistent encouragement which could be done collectively by us, both the government and the NGO community, so that we could document if the alleged abuses, and so that the government institutions in charge, both in Taiwan and in the Philippines, could have the basis to act decisively. After years of multi-sectoral advocacies for fishers' rights and interests against those of recruiters, vessel captains, and employers, and the known gaps in government policies, it is deemed proper to emphasize fishers' responsibilities to themselves too. This is how we encourage the fishers to really speak up, to really, particularly at the point of recruitment. There is no other force which could influence them because they are still in the Philippines. All the support that they need would be there. And once they perceive that there are malpractices at the recruitment point, they can have all the support needed so that we could document and work against those who are abusing them. And even though they finish also their contract, and even while on contract, once they dock and they could reach us, there are helplines, there are NGOs, both in all the ports here, and both church-based and even those community-based organizations, we can collaborate, and we are very open to collaboration when it comes to documenting abuses and reported violations of contracts. And we like to assure you that we at the Philippine Overseas Labor Office in Kaohsiung would always be open to cooperate and collaborate in documenting all these cases, and even in prosecuting those who have to be prosecuted. Thank you very much, and a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you, Labor Attaché Resti. Before I pass it on to Daryl, I would just like to say thank you for agreeing to be part of our webinar. I was particularly struck by your point about the disconnect between how fishers are categorized in Taiwan and the Philippines, because during our research, we were actually able to meet some seafarers or job seekers who are applying to seafarers' job, and really you can find the difference, the huge difference on how their recruitment journey is compared to migrant fishers. And of course, we would love to be part of the ongoing conversations on the new developments that you have, the MOU, the standard employment contract, and I believe other NGOs as well would love to be part of it. And please stay during the Q&A. We would love to have you still, and I think Daryl wants to respond to your responses.
Thank you very much, Maisel. And again, thank you so much, Labat Resti. I'd like to share with everyone in this forum that every time we requested for a meeting with Labat Resti's office, we were always welcomed. And there was always good and open communication. And I'm really moved by the graciousness of your response, and also by with the practical recommendations that you shared with us. I took note of, for instance, a very practical point that you made about job matching. It may seem like a very innocuous, very harmless, simple requirement for recruitment agencies to do, but it can, like you mentioned, it can have very deep impacts on the lives of the workers when they are placed in work situations that they are not prepared for. So I took note of that, and also all of your other points and the improvements that you shared in our report, the one that we're finally publishing, because we provided advanced copies to the reactors here. We added additional information on like specific steps that governments are taking to try to address the situation. And then one thing that I want to say, just based on the work that we've been doing in Taiwan, not just in this sector, but in the land-based sector, we have seen improvement, and but the improvements are slower to happen in the sea-based sector somehow, and that's why I was struck by the labor attaché's comment that the presumption was always that sea-based agencies were better managed, and also because there was always a clear no placement fee policy for sea-based workers. But in our experience of working conditions once they are in Taiwan, the changes have been slower to happen among sea-based workers, but also based on our experience with the land-based workers, we believe that changes can happen. And for instance, who was it who brought up victim identification of human trafficking? I was wondering if victim identification is somehow more effective among land-based workers than among sea-based workers, because again, based on the work that we've done before, we have seen, and we have even cited Taiwan as a model for victim identification of land-based workers. So perhaps there is something to be learned from that, how they've done that successfully among domestic helpers and factory workers, and maybe that those can be applied to the sea-based workers as well. I have so much more that I want to say, but I'm also very conscious of the time, and I do want to invite the participants to ask questions and then give their responses as well. But again, thank you very much for your for sharing your reactions and your insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl, and thank you to our panel of reactors. Thank you so much. At this point, we'll open up the floor for questions and answers. I do have a couple of questions lined up, but feel free to send your questions on the chat box or on my Labor Matters Facebook page, or you can also use the raise hand button on Zoom right now, and our colleagues will be monitoring the order of whoever wants to speak. So I guess I can begin with a question from Bobby. Bobby is the Secretary General of SBMI from Indonesia. Welcome, Bobby. And his question is there a complaints mechanism in the Philippines? And if so, how to execute the complaint and when there is a breach of contract by a fishing vessel? I think, Bobby, please feel free to chime in, whoever you would like to answer that question, but I think I'll let Daryl take a stab at it first.
Or the labor attaché.
Or the labor attaché, yeah.
But I can say that there are existing grievance channels, and there's a very detailed description of the grievance and complaints procedures in the POEA, and we have seen those used by workers from working in other countries or working in other sectors, but somehow they haven't been used much by migrant fishers in Taiwan. But
yeah, that's true, Daryl. The answer of Daryl is very, very accurate. There is a grievance machinery in place, not only in our laws, but this is highly operational. I mean, visibly operational. You can any complainant could simply go to POEA or to OWA, and they will be assisted not only in clarifying the problems, but even in documenting their complaints, and those will be raised to the POEA, and we have seen also how it works against erring agencies. And there's a lot of agencies, not only in the land-based, but even in the sea-based sector, which have been penalized in the past. So as to the question whether there's this grievance machinery, yes, there is this very, very robust grievance machinery in the Philippines. And, and we like to encourage the fishers, if they have complaints, and even our friends in the NGO community, to also help us bring to the surface these erring manning agencies, if ever the allegations by the fishers are correct. Thank you.
Thank you,
I hope
Sir
it
Resi.
answers the question.
Thank you, Sir Resi. Okay, I'll move on to the second question, which we received through Facebook. The question is, did the research also find problems of Filipino fishers in flag of convenience vessels? How does the Philippine government deal with fishermen employed in FOC vessels? So first question is for Daryl, and to be followed by, again, Sir Resi.
Oh, we did, but it was quite difficult to verify because understand that our research was very focused on documenting the recruitment experiences as well as related employment experiences of workers. And if you ask workers, for example, what is the flag of your vessel, they would not know that. What they would know is, what they can tell you is which vessel they're at, and you can verify if the vessel name is similar to what's written in their contract. If you can somehow find a way to get their contract, you can also ask the worker to identify where they boarded the vessel, which countries they go to. They can tell you who their boss is, and they know that their boss is a Taiwanese captain, for example. They know who their broker coordinator is, but most of the time they wouldn't know what flag the vessel is being flown under. So it was very difficult to do that. And I also wanted to mention, in response to Pearl and Lennon's comments earlier, that in our review of regulatory mechanisms, we did look at the legal barriers and the challenges that the many challenges that the FOC practice raised. But ultimately, I think we decided to focus on the recruitment and employment regulations. So again, I want to thank you for bringing up those very, very important points, because these problems are linked. Our report may have been focused only on recruitment, but where the workers end up definitely has a lot to do with what kind of laws are applied to them once they are on the vessel. So thanks. I hope that answered the question. And I think the labor attaché has already mentioned earlier about how they respond to non-Taiwan flagged vessels. But perhaps Labatresi, you want to reiterate that?
Yes, thank you. There is a different procedure when it comes to the foreign vessels, these vessels which are not Taiwan flag. If they use other flags of convenience, then they can go directly to POEA. Ours here is more on the accreditation of principals. So to contribute to the prevention of abuses, of alleged abuses, we made it a point that here in Kaohsiung, we do not facilitate the accreditation of principals for fishing vessels which have different flagship other than Taiwan flag. Now, I hope that what we could help each other in also monitoring would be on the vessel enrollment procedure. This is one aspect in the recruitment where Verite could perhaps focus on. And we find a lot of fishers who were earlier recruited for particular vessels. Is because the POA rules would always require that at least one vessel is enrolled to them before they can be allowed, a manning agency could be allowed to deploy fishers. But later on, you will find out that they are working in different vessels. And sometimes they may even be working on vessels which are not Taiwan flag. So there is really this gap when it comes to enrollment of fishing vessels. The other issue is on the role of the port state authorities. Though as envisaged in the Work and Fishing Convention, they are supposed to be regularly inspecting the vessels and making sure that they comply with the standards. When it comes to Taiwan flag fishing vessels, we were encouraged by the statement of maritime authorities here that though they are not signatories to this convention, they make sure that they observe the standards prescribed in it. So with those pronouncements coming from the authorities, we have this leverage in making sure or in pushing for the observation, for the application of the standards when it comes to Taiwan fishing vessels or those vessels which dock to the harbors of Taiwan. With this, the port state authorities would have a very, very significant and meaningful contribution in preventing or in responding to the alleged abuses on board these fishing vessels.
Thank you, Sir Resty. We have another question, and this is open for all our panel of reactors. And of course, Daryl, working with Taiwan brokers is quite challenging. Can you share some strategies in working with recruitment agencies? Have you documented any good practices from manning agencies? Is there anyone from our panel of reactors who would like to give a stab at it first? Who else is here? We have Lennon. Lennon is still here. Lennon, would you like to respond to that question? Or maybe other participants? Or other.
I'm sorry, I'm distracted a little bit. Can you rephrase what's the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. So the question is about sharing some strategies in working with recruitment agencies, and if we have documented any good practices of agencies, whether in sending or in Taiwan.
I have been visiting some Philippine agencies earlier before the pandemic. I know there is a small alliance. They have policy of no placement fee to the workers. So that is very good. This is what I have seen from the Philippine side. But unfortunately, from what I heard from these two mining agencies in the Philippines, that well, first is they focus on the professional workers or skilled workers, no domestic workers, and secondly, they don't have any business to Taiwan up to now. One of the reasons is from one agency, they said, because the labor market of migrant workers in Taiwan is notorious. They knew it, so they don't want to mess with it. Yeah, it's very sad to hear that, but at the same time, we know it's very, very true for what she said. Yes, we know how bad it is. So we also hope that some good agencies with the zero fee policy, they can intervene. We also know there are some other agencies in Taiwan. Well, there's one from this employer of the agency. She said they have been trying to tell their counterparts, well, this is not the Philippines, this is in Indonesia. She told the counterpart that, well, take out my part. I don't want my benefit. You take yours. So please deduct less, maybe 2 million rupiah less to this worker. But unfortunately, when the worker came, it's a domestic worker, not a fisherman anyway. But I'm saying in general, the feedback from the worker was she was still she still paid the same amount of money. So this agency, the owner of the agency, asked the counterpart in Indonesia, also, why did you do that? I told you take less, right? And the other, okay, the owner of the Indonesian agency, who's also a Chinese Indonesian, she told her, well, you want trouble? Okay, we can block you, and I can tell all the agencies in Indonesia to block you, so you cannot recruit anyone from Indonesia. So this is the reality. So what I found in the Philippines, there are some certain agencies, they have no placement fee policy, while in Indonesia, it doesn't exist. Well, they have some, if they recruit workers for some companies that with the zero placement fee policy, they will only divide the workers, okay? So they will divide, okay, these workers are for this company, so there's no placement fee because the boss will pay it. But the other workers, even in the same agency, they still collect. So I'm sorry, I'm telling the negative experiences. But what we are trying to do is, some positive side. From the ILO, from IOM, we can see the demands of fair recruitment or ethical recruitment or responsible recruitment, as mentioned in this project of Verite, that it's demanding, the world is demanding for a zero placement fee. And we also know that for the recent development, the Indonesian government, the agency which is the government agency in charge of the migrant workers, they all, the gentleman in charge of this agency, he also demanded, okay, from January next year, there should be no placement fee for the Indonesian migrant workers in 10 occupations, including the fishing and domestic workers. The response from Taiwan government is the same when they heard the no border lodging 6 years ago. They said, okay, no, you cannot do that without telling us, without discussing first. But we will need to see what's the response, and we have to follow up this issue later on. But I do hope we have a gentleman from Polo Kaohsiung. We hope actually the Philippine government can do the same. If the migrant sending country, the government of the migrant sending country can demand, there should be no placement fee. It should be paid by the employer, I think. And if you can work together with the other sending countries, there should be a bigger pressure to Taiwan. We have to ask the government of Taiwan to pressure the employers to do something. We shouldn't, the agencies, while they are doing some services, the charge is reasonable, but most of the services is for the employers, not to the workers. So at least most of the money should be paid by the employer instead of the workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Lennon, for your feedback and for that call to action for zero-fee recruitment for migrant fishers. Is there anyone from our participants who would like to share some strategies in dealing with recruitment agencies? I think that's a very good question. Allison? And anyone, please raise your hand or... Father Jens?
Hello, everyone. I am really happy to listen to the speakers, to the presentation of Ate Daryl. Ate Daryl, very great. Congratulations. And I just want to re-echo what Lennon is saying. Since Taiwan has most of the workers are from Southeast Asia, I guess the countries of South Asia has to be united in creating one rule or regulations for their workers who will be sent in Taiwan. If they don't have common regulations, it is difficult to go against the agents because agents are more intelligent. If the Indonesians put more pressure on how to call it, increasing the how to call it, in not paying the accommodation and other things, and they will go to Vietnam. If Vietnam is how to call it, will be strict, they will go to the Philippines. So if the three countries, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam, they are united, they come together, sit down together, it will be a great impact to Taiwan government and also to the agencies. Otherwise, it will be difficult to solve the problems. If they are more smart than us, then we have to be smarter than them, you know?
Thank you for that excellent point, Father Jens. Yeah, we're glad to have SBMI here, which is an Indonesian NGO, but definitely even within country, it's important to collaborate, but also inter-country NGO collaboration is important. I would like to call on Bonnie Ling, who raised
Hi.
her hand.
Hi
Hello.
there. Hi, it's nice to see many of you. I've heard about your work and thank you for the excellent presentation. I just have a small comment to add on to Lennon's point about recruitment agencies. And what I know from research into the recruitment practices in Taiwan is that it's almost a system of legalized human trafficking. You know, I wrote my comment in the chat that there's utter disbelief that there can be trafficking within the legalized system of labor migration. So when I often talk to people, they said, well, you know, it can't be trafficking because it's legal, you know. So it's almost like a question that's turned on its head, that it's difficult for recruiters, for those who, you know, the general public to believe that it's the system itself that is so flawed and that has gone through the various legislative process. So I also find another thing is that the various regulations, the laws dealing with recruitment to be very opaque, very difficult to follow. And in a way, I think, you know, it's almost in that direction where I feel like there's, it was so carefully constructed to allow for exploitation of the workers to take place. So it's difficult. It's difficult to deconstruct it, but definitely a coordinated approach is needed. Because right now, Vietnam, also a sending state of migrant workers to Taiwan, they are looking at reducing their recruitment fees, you know. And the question is, well, what's next? Are we looking at another labor migration corridor coming from Cambodia, coming from Myanmar, that will take over some of these huge fees? So the problem is always, you know, it spirals, and we definitely need a better regional coordinated approach. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Father Joy, you also raised your hand.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I think Bonnie nailed it. The problem is the Taiwan government policy of allowing the broker system to run forever. I think three things happen. As long as the broker system exists in Taiwan, we have a legalized human trafficking problem. Number two, with the broker, the third party system in Taiwan, we allowed every employer to wash their hands and put every problem back to the hands of the broker who are not the employer. I think again, this is a legalized human trafficking in Taiwan. Recruitment maybe for one time for any agency is good enough. But to have a 12-year, 14-year broker with a monthly charge, to me, is a legalized human trafficking. They don't do anything. But on top of that, the third party don't only ask for broker's fee and monthly broker's fee. They also run the dormitory. They run the food services. They run the ticketing and everything else that the workers needs to do. This should be the job of the employer. But in Taiwan, everybody, caretaker, fisherman, factory worker, have to go through the broker. And three, the only way to solve this problem is for the Taiwan government to have the willpower to stop and reduce the broker system. Number four, we have to be realistic. No matter how much the Philippine government, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand said, we want to do it this way, the reality is poverty in this country. And the people, because they are poor, they will try to grab anything so that they can feed their family. Unfortunately, the poor becomes the number one victim of the systematic human trafficking problem in Taiwan. Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you all. I hope again we continue to challenge the Taiwan government to please remove the systematic broker system in hiring migrant workers in Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Joy. Do we have other questions from the floor? I think that's still Father Joy. Okay, let me address this question that was submitted through email by Fuzz from Be Slavery Free. Unfortunately, he left us already, but his question is about what is being done to inform and educate potential fishers in Taiwanese long-haul vessels regarding labor conditions and precautions of such employment. In other words, pre-contract informing, information, and training. Daryl?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that one and to the previous question about good practices. So in our research, first of all, it was very, very difficult to engage recruitment agencies, both in the Philippines and in Taiwan. And finally, two representatives of recruitment agencies in the Philippines agreed to talk to us. And they just happened to be the two better agencies that we have ever met. And Lennon, you might be interested in this because one of them was actively supplying workers to the DWF sector. And of course, we did not have, enough time to really look into their practices, but, they were very open. They allowed us to look at their contracts, even the orientation materials that they used with their workers. We looked at the calculation of wages, the documentation of the remittances, and so on. And this was at the very least, a very professional manning agency. But also, she told us that it was a decision that she had to make, and she was very upfront. She said, 5-10 years ago, I was collecting fees as well. 5 to 10 years ago, I was advancing loans to my workers and then collecting it from them little by little. And then she said, eventually, as she got to know, the workers, the type of workers that she was sending out, and understood how difficult their working lives were, her practices changed. But she said, the only way she could change her practices was by being able to find also the right partners in Taiwan. So she said that she can never grow her business as big as the businesses of her other peers in the recruitment sector, because she would only be able to work with a small number of principals and a small number of recruiters who are willing to pay for the full cost of recruitment. And she said she has rejected many offers from TMAs, Taiwan manpower agencies, that would, encourage her to increase the recruitment fees so that, there's going to be a kickback system. So she said you have to be ready to say no to offers of bigger profit, and just be ready, to earn enough to keep your to keep your recruitment agency ethical but also healthy. So my short answer to that is yes, there exists a very small number perhaps of recruitment agencies that are actively supplying workers, but also doing things right. To the second question was about what's being done to increase the awareness of workers, which was a point that Labat Resti also brought up. Well, I can share that the two agencies that we talked to, one of their, I would say, landmark practices was also conducting pre-departure orientation and post-arrival orientation. So in other words, there is an example of good practice that can be done. And when we talk to the workers that that this particular recruitment agency was placing in Taiwan, we could really tell the difference between them and the other workers that did not go through a proper pre-departure orientation. So yes, I guess there are a very few recruitment agencies that are doing this, and then perhaps our colleagues in Taiwan can also talk about their own programs that they're doing directly with workers. Thanks.
Thank you, Daryl. Is there any other are there other questions from participants? Is anyone raising their hand at the moment? If none, I think I will pass on the floor to Irene Abano, who has graciously accepted our last-minute invitation for her to do some synthesis of 3-hour conversations that we have been having. Irene?
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Irene from the Center for Migrant Advocacy, and we have been working with some Taiwan partners as well on fishers, as well as factory workers. So how to synthesize such a long discussion, such a long and rich discussion on top of the research findings? So let me see how that is possible. No? So from Daryl's report on the research, so interventions should focus on addressing the cost of labor migration to migrant fishers, on risk prevention mechanisms, and then stress the importance of multi-stakeholder response. And then just like what the reactor Labat Resti was saying, workers should be directly involved in preventing and addressing risks and issues that may arise in the whole migration process. So from the recruitment while they're on board. No? So that would mean we need to do a lot of capacity building for our workers. The research also came out with specific recommendations for the Philippine, Taiwan governments, as well as to the private sector. So the research also identified as one of the recommendations involving the supply chains, to look at more closely the recruitment and hiring practices, as well as working and living conditions of migrant fishers employed on tuna fishing vessels. Finally, to also analyze recruitment-related issues against the framework of anti-corruption and business conduct. So for the reactors, Sir Sunny of Greenpeace Southeast Asia, of course, uh, affirmed that most forced labor indicators are described in the research, and broke the news about the 2020 list of goods showed Taiwan's fishing sector as exhibiting forced labor, and also identified ways forward, ratification of Convention 188 to disclose the names of fishing vessels involved in forced labor for prevention purposes of prevention of trafficking purposes, as well as looked at ASEAN to lead other sending countries in terms of crafting rules to address the issue. So I think that's they can take off from the ASEAN Convention on Trafficking. Like Father Joy, Sir Sunny also said that there has to be work opportunities in the sending countries so that they won't be in this vulnerable situation. Father Joy very concretely posed issues, no, to the research. Why is it that fishermen, why does it take the Taiwan government so long to allow fishers who are victims of trafficking to transfer to another job while investigations are going on? Also, it seems that Polo does not, I'm not very sure about this, but Polo in Taiwan does not identify deduction of 8,000 on workers' salaries as a case of human trafficking. And the problem is the Taiwan government also, as also identified by Sir Lennon, doesn't see TIP in the same way. So Sir Lennon said that there has to be physical manifestation, physical abuse, as well as the workers have to be locked up for the Taiwan government to identify it as a trafficking issue. Where am I? Wait, I lost my. Okay, so and Sir Lennon had to make it very concrete that one, the problem with the withholding is actually an issue about the employer's lobby against the minimum wage. So the Taiwan government compromise is to allow them to include food and accommodation into the computation of the minimum wage. He also identified some opportunities, but also brought us down to the ground that one is the problem about trafficking. The other one is that there are no inspections. What's the other one? There are no inspections, no direct hiring in the fishing industry, and no grievance mechanism for distant fishers, because what's available is only for the local workers. And if you call that, you will be referred to the fisheries agency, which doesn't know which wouldn't be able to respond properly. Ms. Pearl of Greenpeace East Asia also highlighted that there's insufficient presence of NGOs in the evaluation of manning agencies, lack of control on foreign manning agencies, and in relation to this, that the lack of diplomatic relations is also a barrier in terms of for the Taiwan side. And she also echoed that there's insufficient inspection, if any. What else? And if found to have forced labor, Taiwan government cannot revoke the permit. What could be asked from the Taiwan government is that if found to have forced labor, the Taiwan government can actually revoke the permit for Taiwan nationals in operating flags of convenience. Where else? Labat Resti stressed the importance of transforming fishers into active participants in protecting their rights. But Father Joy, of course, highlighted that the poverty situation in the Philippines is a major factor why this is hard. This is a difficult thing for our migrant workers. He also said that there is a need to harmonize Philippine and Taiwan regulations in favor of fishers. And he said that the research would be a good reference material for ongoing or soon to be negotiations or consultations in relation to an upcoming MOU between the Philippines and Taiwan in relation to fishers. He also shared different government initiatives in relation to fishers, but I think I should stop there because there's no more time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. Wow, that was a perfect summary synthesis of this whole webinar. It's particularly helpful for those who just connected and joined the call, the webinar. So thank you so much. If we need to prepare an activity report, basically we'll just document what you just said. No, just kidding. At this point, I would like to thank you everyone for joining the webinar. I know we can continue having these conversations. It's already 3 hours that we're talking about this, and we hope to continue to provide more opportunities for this kinds of activities. But also, I would like to thank our panel of reactors, Lennon, Father Joy, Pearl, Sunny, and Labat Resti. Thank you so much. And for the others who already dropped the call, we will share the link to this recording, which we will post on my Labor Matters Facebook page. Thank you so much. Please don't forget to fill out the evaluation form. And also my last request, everyone, is if it's okay to have a group photo, please turn on your video cameras and we'll disable the screen share so that we can take a documentation of this very fruitful webinar.